to That Eric Alper Show on Canada Talks.
Welcome back to the program. My name is Eric Alper. In the last segment, I just finished talking to Liz Wright. So in case if you missed that segment, go check it out on the Sirius XM app. There's a brand new book out called The Ballad of Speedball Baby, and it's a thrilling, extremely funny, and heart-wrenching story of Allie Smith as she comes of age in the 1990s New York. She commits to an absolute messy, exhilarating life of a musician and has to survive the slings and arrows that society reserves only for women who refuse to comply in music. She becomes the bass player for the edgy band Speedball Baby and takes her around the world while kind of keeping her bearings. You know, there's a lot of things that are thrown at her in a scene full of addiction, violence, misogyny. All the while, Allie keeps her sharp wit and dark humor intact. I'm so happy to have Allie Smith join me. Hi, Allie.
Hi, Eric.
Talk to me about the book because, first of all, I loved it and I adored it. And I was a big fan of the band. And it pained me to read certain parts of it. But we're going to get into it because I think you just stabbed out a lot of truths that being in the music industry for almost 30 years, I've seen and I've heard. And to see it in front of you over and over and over again as a reader, it's disappointing that it still goes on, or it was happening when maybe a lot of people either A, didn't know about it, or B, just didn't want to do anything about it. But in writing the book, did you write the book for the same reason that you first started in music, to be heard, to be seen, or was there a comparison between you kind of wanting to be up there on stage and performing and writing the book?
Oh God, that's such a great way to voice it. You know, I mean, I think they're of a piece, yeah, to be truly seen. Although I would say, 30 years ago when I was starting to play in bands, it was a much more external version that I wanted to be seen the way I wanted to be seen. I wanted to control the view of me, and join a great pantheon of people like Gay Advert and, like wonderful women in bands for decades. And Gay Advert, the person, not a specific advert for, and wonderful musicians. So it was probably a more external approach to being seen. And now that time has moved on and I'm valuing other things. And I do want to think like, what was that all about? And it also seems to create a lot of space for other people in the industry, in that world. Many of us were a real sensitive bunch, because we were the artists and, we ended up in these scenes in different ways, but we had a lot of commonality, there's probably something compelling us to be a part of this sort of difficult lifestyle. And now that I feel like I'm willing to be the first one to raise the hand in any room and say, this is how I really felt and this is what was really happening, and I'm going to be honest about it. It allows a lot of other people, I think anybody doing that allows a lot of other people to also speak truthfully, and that's beautiful.
I've heard a lot of artists when they talk about being on stage or when they're writing songs, that they kind of step outside of their bodies. Like it's a very non-conscious way of performing where your fingers are moving, but you're not really thinking about it. You've got this heightened sense of euphoria, being up on stage in front of people who are admiring you and is hitting the great story in the book or catching a bunch of really great sentences to turn it into a great paragraph, into a great bunch of pages. Did you feel the same way? Did you get that sense of like, this is kind of like being a rock star?
Well, yeah. I mean, especially when you get those words that flow together. I mean, I feel like when I was first writing, it was a lot of sort of diary entries, you know what I mean? Like this happened and I felt like this and blah, 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 and all the most dramatic stuff. And like, it's sort of like when you're playing in a band, you sort of go in with everything, like blah, throw up. And that's a great thing to do. That's a great way to lead with passion and heart. And after a while, it's not exactly sustainable, or maybe, just if it doesn't lead anywhere else, then it's maybe not that interesting. So with the writing, I do feel like I went with the same immediacy and the same sort of urgency that I took to music. And and tried to make the same kind of connection. You know what I mean? So that took a while. This was a new skill for me to write in this way. So I had to
Yeah.
like burn off all the fuzz of the extra words. And then once it got consolidated to the meaningful words and it was really impactful, that was very exciting. Yeah, like
You
those
mentioned that
moments
sense
obviously.
of urgency. I think part of it, and forgive me for not wanting to put words into your mouth, but it's interesting that you mentioned that word because I think you writing the book as it happened rather than looking back on it. I read somewhere that it was your daughter-in-law that said, don't write it in the past tense, write it as it happened. And I think that was the key when I didn't realize that until much later because I'm thick and I'm not that smart. And
No,
when I
you were
saw
leading with
that,
your emotions, not your
yes, and when I
intellect.
saw that quote, it was like, that's it. That's what it was. And you just mentioned
Uh,
that sense of urgency where you did feel like you were living with you in all of these moments. Talk to me about that moment where she said that and how it made sense to you.
Yeah, that's so great that you picked up on that, man. So it was my stepdaughter. And so I'd written this book a lot, like many, many times, and I really felt good about it. But it wasn't quite crystal clear yet. And I asked her, I asked, my friend Miriam, who sort of started this whole project for me. I asked my husband, blah, 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 just, these wonderful charitable nuggets. They gave me their time to read it. And she read it and she's like, I love it. It's so you, blah, blah, blah. Have you ever thought about writing it in the present tense? And it was just sort of like, it was just her gut. And I just thought, damn it, I'm gonna have to write this whole thing in the present tense now because she might be totally right. And she was right. So it gave it that urgency that it was totally lacking by looking back.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Mm.
How much could you have written this book if the Me Too movement hadn't happened, giving voices to people who were normally silenced or
Mm.
not really cared about in terms of the industry in general? Could you have done it like 5 years ago?
I mean, you know what? I mean, I was doing it 5 years ago. So I already was committed to doing this in the way that I have always tried to speak, which is sort of truthfully and plainly. But when I was going through this stuff, there was no cultural conversation that anybody really wanted to listen to that would get any traction. It was a
Yeah.
very, about like sexism and misogyny and abuse and sexual attack in an industry and all this stuff. So I was probably still operating from this lone wolf idea that like, I'm gonna do it and I'm a feminist and I'm me, and like I'm gonna do it, but I don't know what resonance it can have bigger than that, But the fact that Me Too and, all these women who fell on their swords to come out about these truths have happened is so not just encouraging, but just like it's monumental. Like there's this show called Sex Education. I don't know if you've
Mm.
seen it with
Yep.
Gillian Anderson.
Yep.
And, I'm watching an episode about a sexual transgression against a teenage girl that's on a hit show, and all the young women in the show, I don't know if this is reality, it's TV, but I hope it's reality, and at least it's reflective of something different. All of them are immediately like, absolutely not. That's wrong. We're going to support you. And they all coalesce around this woman. And I just think I was sobbing because like there
Yeah.
was no
There was none of
opportunity
that.
for that. There was
Yeah.
there's no thought that that would be an option. It
Yeah.
wasn't that we didn't care about each other, but you had a very like, well, we've all been through it. Like everybody's wondering, why am I going to step out of line for you? There was
Yeah.
no support. So you make a great observation that I think in that context, I would have done it anyway. But at this point, I feel a little bit like, what have I got to lose also?
Yeah.
Certainly not my
Mhm.
self-respect because I respect myself more for it.
Yeah.
But in the context of the cultural conversation, that's fantastic. It takes on a different life.
Yeah. How old is your stepdaughter? Is she a teenager, more or less? Is she old?
No, no, no.
Young?
My son is 14 now, but my stepdaughter's 30.
Okay.
So
So
she's, yeah.
you've got a wide range of potential music fans in your little in your area. Um all of the changes that have happened um, in the music industry, both in terms of financial and amazing things like Spotify, just making music available forever to everyone. And of course, the artist is going to always be the last one to get paid.
Thank
Looking
you for
back
saying
on
that.
it,
Yeah.
because it's interesting that like, you mentioned that show, and I think it can go either way. My daughter's 21, and she's
Mhm.
kind of like that show where she is very much full of morals, and I never worry about her or her friends. And then you see still the absolute sexualization of teenage girls in music industry. So in looking back on the industry now, if you had to change something back then, if there was an opportunity for somebody to say to you, what would you like to see change to make it better? What would you say?
Well, okay, so what's her name that starred in Twilight? She's a great actor.
Oh,
You know who I
Kristen
mean.
Stewart, was that
Yes.
the one? Yeah.
She was just on the front. Wasn't she
Yeah.
recently
In
on the
Rolling Stone
front of Rolling
magazine.
Stone?
Yeah.
And she got all this hefty helping of about her sexualization on the cover. But I think that the tone of it was that, it was gender uh, fluid or somehow offensive in that regard. So it wasn't fitting into a neat category of, and it sort of exemplifies to me, sure, we've come a long way, but if you're still looking to the square world, which I would count, most major corporations and magazines
Yeah.
in, just because of the nature of publications and business. Um, if you're looking to them to have like the true revolutionary spirit or the temperature of the times, you're going to be looking a long time because that's magazine that's got to sell to everybody.
Yeah.
And the first thing I thought of was Britney Spears all tarted up
Yeah.
like a sexualized, hypersexualized
Yeah. It's a
schoolgirl.
17-year-old back
Yeah,
in the 90s. Yeah.
and like I'd like to believe that if that cover went out now, it would be unacceptable, but I don't believe that actually. I
Yeah.
still think people wouldn't really blink an eye because it still conforms to something that's very ingrained and deep in there. It's the most, schoolgirls uniform is unfortunately the most sexualized totem
Totally.
available, so it was just this thing about like, yeah, we've come a long way, but continuously like pop culture or mainstream culture sticks to the old tropes. So
Mhm.
I guess what I would like to see change is, and maybe it is changing, is, a real subculture to continue. Like all sorts of music, areas of music have been co-opted successfully. They tried to do it with us in the 90s. They tried to do it with a lot of bands in the 90s so they could find the next Nirvana. Like once you figure out how to make money on something, then you try to manufacture it and put it into this world.
Yeah.
Um, I'd like to think that there's a lot more freedom with Spotify and stuff. Maybe there is, but at the same time, like you're right, the artists are still the last to get paid. That's from the inception of the music industry, so it's not new.
Yeah.
But I guess it's really about wresting power back from these gatekeepers. That's what subcultures are about, and they're still pretty unimaginative, the gatekeepers.
Yeah. Um, Thank you for writing the book. I
Thank
have
you.
tried to I've tried to have a career that was none of the horribleness of the industry. And but reading it was um it it was it was wild. It was like you were the perfect tour guide for a whole generation of music, touching on so many fine points to it. And it was amazing. And I hope that it becomes just such like a Bible for any bands and women who want to do this well and get through it in one piece, because it certainly seems like you have, even if you have
Oh,
to
Eric.
travel halfway around the world for your perfect house.
Eric, thank you. I mean, that means so much to me, everything you just said. I know about your history in the music world. I know that you know what you're speaking about, and that it resonated with you and seemed meaningful to you and true is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you going on a lot of book tours over there?
No, I'm not really.
No.
I think the landscape's changed a bit, unless it's like let's get it to be a best-selling book and then we'll be out there. But I've been doing a ton of stuff remotely and a couple of events that have been amazing. So yeah, playing a little bit of music and stuff.
The brand new book is called The Battle of Speedball, Baby, and it is out now. Coming up next, I'm going to be talking to the founder and leader of the heavy metal band called Replicire. His name is Eric Alper, and he and I, Eric Alper, are next on That Eric Alper Show, Channel 167, Canada Talks.
Half man.